The rain hammered against the floor-to-ceiling windows of Marcus Wellington's penthouse office, each drop a tiny fist demanding attention he refused to give. He sat behind his mahogany desk, surrounded by the trappings of a fortune built from nothing, vintage scotch he never drank, awards he never displayed, photographs with presidents and prime ministers whose names blurred together. At 52, he'd conquered industries, dominated markets, and accumulated wealth that could fund small nations. Yet tonight, staring at the city lights bleeding through the storm, he felt hollower than the day his mother died in that cramped hospice room, her hand cold in his, her last words a whisper he'd spent 30 years trying to forget. "Don't let money make you forget what matters." The intercom buzzed. "Mr. Wellington, your car is ready for the charity gala." Marcus exhaled slowly, straightening his bow tie. Another evening of champagne philanthropy, where millionaires congratulated themselves for donating what they'd never miss. He grabbed his coat and headed to the elevator, his reflection in the polished doors, showing a man who'd won everything and felt nothing. The accident happened 3 blocks from the venue. Marcus's driver swerved to avoid a taxi, sending the town car careening into a construction barrier. The impact wasn't severe, a crumpled fender, deployed airbags, the acrid smell of burnt rubber, but it left them stranded in a neighborhood Marcus hadn't seen in decades. Not the gentrified streets of renovated brownstones, but the forgotten blocks where laundromats still operated with coin slots and corner stores barricaded their windows at dusk. "Sir, I'll call for another vehicle," his driver said, already on his phone. Marcus stepped onto the rain-slicked sidewalk, waving him off. "I'll walk. The venue's not far." It was a lie. He had no intention of going to the gala. He walked without direction, letting the rain soak through his $1,000 suit jacket. The streets grew quieter, narrower. Apartment buildings loomed overhead, their fire escapes decorated with satellite dishes and forgotten bicycles. This was the America that didn't appear in his boardrooms or balance sheets. The America his mother had known, where every dollar meant 3 meals or 2, where survival required the kind of calculus they didn't teach at Harvard. He was about to turn back when he smelled it, something savory and warm, cutting through the rain. His stomach, neglected through another day of back-to-back meetings, responded with an embarrassing growl. He followed the scent to a narrow alley where a dim light glowed from a ground-floor window. The apartment was humble. Through the glass, Marcus could see a cramped kitchen, where a woman stirred something on an old stove. 2 children sat at a small table doing homework by the light of a single lamp. The scene was so ordinary, so intimate, that Marcus felt like an intruder just watching it. The woman looked up suddenly, catching his eye. She froze, wooden spoon suspended mid-air, clearly startled to find a soaking wet stranger in an expensive suit staring through her window. Marcus raised his hands apologetically and started to leave, but the door opened. "Are you all right?" The woman stood in the doorway, concern etched on her face. She was perhaps 35, with tired eyes that still managed warmth, and dark hair pulled into a practical ponytail. "You look lost." "I'm fine," Marcus said automatically. "I apologize for disturbing you. I was just freezing to death in the rain." Apparently, she studied him with the kind of frank assessment that came from years of reading people, situations, and threats. "You hurt?" "No, my car broke down. I was walking." She glanced at his suit, his watch, the Italian leather shoes now soaked through. Something shifted in her expression, not judgment exactly, but understanding. "Walking where?" Marcus realized he had no answer. The woman made a decision. "Come on. You'll catch pneumonia standing there." "I couldn't possibly." "You can and you will. I'm Elena Rodriguez, and I don't let people freeze on my watch, regardless of how expensive their watch actually is." A small smile flickered across her face. "My mother would haunt me." Before Marcus could protest again, he found himself inside the tiny apartment. It was immaculately clean despite obvious poverty, furniture worn but cared for, everything in its place. The children looked up curiously as their mother ushered the stranger in. "Mia, Tommy, this is—" Elena paused, realizing she didn't have a name. "Marcus," he supplied. Mr. Marcus had some car trouble. "He's going to warm up here for a bit." She turned to Marcus, practical and efficient. Bathroom's down the hall if you want to dry off. I'll see if I have anything that might fit you. 10 minutes later, Marcus Wellington, a man whose closet contained suits worth more than most people's cars, sat at Elena Rodriguez's kitchen table, wearing her late father's flannel, shirt and sweatpants, eating the best chicken soup he'd tasted in 30 years. "This is remarkable," he said honestly. Elena shrugged, stirring the pot on the stove. "It's just soup. My abuela's recipe. She always said good food doesn't need fancy ingredients. Just time and attention. Mom makes everything good," 9-year-old Mia announced proudly. "She's the best cook in the whole world." "That's a scientific fact," 7-year-old Tommy added seriously, making everyone smile. As they ate, Marcus learned their story in pieces. Elena's husband had died 4 years ago. Sudden heart attack at 32. No warning, no life insurance. She'd been working 3 jobs to keep them afloat until the diner she managed closed last month. Now she was down to 2 jobs, night shift at a hospital and weekend, house cleaning while searching desperately for something more stable. "I don't have much education," she said matter-of-factly, clearing plates. "Dropped out of community college when I got pregnant with Mia. Can't afford to go back now. Most places want degrees for anything that pays decent." "What would you do if you could do anything?" Marcus asked. Elena paused at the sink, hands in soapy water, considering. "I'd cook. Open a small restaurant, maybe, or do catering. Something that lets me use my hands. Create something that makes people happy." She laughed softly. "But that takes money I don't have. So for now, I clean offices and change bedpans. It's honest work. It pays the bills mostly." Tommy tugged Marcus's sleeve. "Are you rich?" "Tommy!" Elena spun around, mortified. "That's rude." "It's all right," Marcus said. He looked at the boy's curious face, untainted by the cynicism Marcus wore like armor. "Yes, I suppose I am." "Then why were you walking in the rain?" It was such a simple question, asked with such innocent directness, that Marcus found himself answering truthfully. "Because I forgot how to feel anything. I built an empire but lost track of why it mattered." Tommy nodded sagely as if this made perfect sense. "Mom says when you're lost, you gotta remember what you're walking toward, not just what you're walking away from." Elena's face colored. "That's Tommy. Mr. Marcus doesn't need our folk wisdom." But Marcus was staring at the boy, something cracking open in his chest. His mother's last words echoed suddenly. Clearly, don't let money make you forget what matters. He stayed for 3 hours, helping the kids with homework, doing dishes, listening to Elena's stories about her grandmother's village in Mexico and her father's dreams of opening a restaurant that never materialized. The apartment was small, cramped, probably violated a dozen housing codes, but it was filled with something Marcus's penthouse lacked entirely: love, purpose, the kind of wealth that couldn't be traded on stock exchanges. When he finally stood to leave, his own clothes dry, but his heart fundamentally altered, Elena walked him to the door. "Thank you," Marcus said, "for your kindness, for reminding me what matters." Elena smiled, tired but genuine. "We all need reminding sometimes. You take care of yourself, Marcus." He paused at the threshold. "What if I could help? With your restaurant dream?" Her expression shuddered immediately. "I don't need charity. Not charity, investment. I've built my fortune recognizing talent when I see it. Your food, your warmth, your business sense, that's talent. That's worth investing in. I don't have much to offer." "Sir," Elena said quietly, pride and vulnerability warring in her voice. "No collateral, no business plan, no fancy credentials. But I can cook. And I work harder than anyone you'll ever meet." Marcus thought about his mother, who'd cleaned houses to put him through college, about the meals she'd stretched to feed them both, the dreams she'd set aside so he could pursue his, about the 30 years he'd spent proving he was nothing like where he came from, only to realize he'd lost everything she'd tried to teach him. "That's more than enough," he said. 6 months later, Elena's kitchen opened in a renovated space 3 blocks from where they'd met. Not a charity case, but a genuine partnership. Marcus's capital and business expertise, Elena's culinary genius and understanding of what her community needed. The restaurant featured her grandmother's recipes and her father's dreams, with prices affordable enough for neighbors and quality. high enough to attract critics from across the city. Marcus invested in more than the restaurant. He funded scholarships for Elena to take business courses, created a hiring program for other single parents, established a model that proved profitable while prioritizing people over pure profit margins. His board thought he'd lost his mind. His accountants raised concerns, but for the first time in decades, Marcus Wellington slept soundly, dreaming not of stock prices but of chicken soup and children's laughter. On opening night, as critics and neighbors and investors mingled over Elena's cooking, Marcus stood in the corner watching. Elena caught his eye across the crowded room and mouthed 2 words. "Thank you." He shook his head and mouthed back, "Thank you." Because Elena Rodriguez, who'd opened her door to a lost stranger, who'd shared her soup and her story and her wisdom, had given him something worth more than all his billions. She'd reminded him what his mother had known, what Tommy had understood instinctively, that wealth measured in dollars meant nothing without wealth measured in kindness, purpose, and human connection. The rain had brought him to her door. But it was her generosity, offered when she had almost nothing to spare, that had brought him home.